Meanwhile, Nebraska senior linebacker Michael Rose-Ivy explained exactly why this country needs to have quite uncomfortable conversations about race relations. And that's why he, along with teammates Mohamed Barry and Deshaun Neal, took a knee during the playing of the national anthem prior to Saturday's game at Northwestern. Now, Nebraska Regent Hal Daub, who served 2 years in Korea during the Vietnam era, told the Journal-Star on Tuesday, quote, NU student athletes are not supposed to do things that create disparagement or negative implications. It's a free country. They don't have to play football for the university either. They know better, and they had better be kicked off the team. Well, there's that. And Daub later denied, saying that the players should be removed from the team in a phone call to the Journal-Star, but he stood by other comments on the players. Now, Nebraska University President Hank Bounds responded, saying this: I've served in the military. I understand love. And I understand love of country, of the flag, and I know that freedom is not free. I recognize that some are upset by what they saw on Saturday night. But let me be clear. The University of Nebraska will not restrict the First Amendment rights of any student or employee. Stephen A., want to start with you here. Your reaction.
Well, this guy, Hal Daub, the university regent, and the former mayor of Omaha, I might add, has a lot of damn nerves. And, you know, Michael Rose-Ivy, Deshaun Neal, Mohamed Barry, they are students exercising their First Amendment privileges. Now, we understand that there are people that would disagree with their position, and I respect that. My problem, since the day Colin Kaepernick started all of this and people reacted to it, is how folks are trying to change the narrative. If these guys just took a knee and were being disrespectful towards our flag, towards the national anthem, I would have a serious problem with it. I wouldn't like it at all. I would still respect their right to do it, but I would still have a serious problem with it. I wouldn't like it, because I do think it would be a disservice and a level of disrespect aimed towards our military servicemen and women who represent our country so valiantly. But once the players come out and specifically and explicitly state that in no way are they pointing the finger or of ire or anything else towards our military men and women, that they were talking about racial injustices that have taken place in this country and still take place to this day, I am still at a loss as to the level of vitriol folks are aiming in their direction, using the military as an excuse. And when you got this guy, Hal Daub, who wants to sit up there and speak out against these kids, I thought his words were egregious. Let me read the quote that was in the Journal-Star in Nebraska, supposedly from Hal Daub. And I believe this reporter quoted him accurately, by the way. He says, quote, this is Hal Daub, "It's a free country. They don't have to play football for the university either. They know better, and they had better be kicked off the team. They won't take the risk to exhibit their free speech in a way that places their circumstances in jeopardy, so let them get out of uniform and do their protesting on somebody else's nickel." Really? First of all, if these were kids acting up, we put their faces up. Could y'all please put Hal Daub's face? Let's put that mugshot up on national television, even though he hasn't been arrested or anything like that. Let's put Hal Daub's face up in there. By the way, he's the former mayor of Omaha. Do you know how many callers called into my radio show yesterday, Max Kellerman, Molly, on Sirius XM Mad Dog Sports Radio from Nebraska, talking about how this has really stirred stuff up? Because there have been some racial issues in Nebraska. Folks getting pulled over by the cops, folks, certain violence being exacted against African Americans, what have you. The former mayor of Omaha, who happens to be a regent member for Nebraska, Mr. Hal Daub, basically is saying, hey, you do stuff our way or else. Wait a minute. They're peaceful. They haven't interrupted the game. They haven't impeded anybody's ability to come to the game and watch the game and enjoy the game. They have sat quietly. And still, you're not just talking about disagreement, Max. He's talking about exacting action against them because they're not doing what he wants them to do. Hal Daub is the problem here, and he needs to be dealt with.
Real quick, I neglected to mention earlier, then he later denied that he ever made the
You mentioned it.
I did? Okay,
No, you mentioned it, and I'm telling you I don't believe it.
And by the way,
I'm telling you I don't believe it.
Hank Bounds, the university president, I served in the military, I understand love of country. You quoted that whole thing. Let me be clear. The University of Nebraska will not restrict the First Amendment rights of any student or employee. So the university president deserves kudos.
Yes, he does.
What's going on here is a cultural referendum, which is happening in this election even, about what kind of country we want to live in and maybe even what kind of country we now live in. What is the kind of dominant culture in our country? Because we're in a period of transition.
Yeah.
And this has happened along to various people in the media, or the media has covered this happening to various people in popular culture, in the political realm, who have voiced an opinion that not too long ago was dominant culture, reflected the views of dominant culture and what was considered proper for public discourse. And we're taken aback by the reaction because of social media and the democratizing effect it's had, and has given voice to a lot of people who felt differently, to an emerging kind of dominant culture that doesn't feel the way the old-timers felt. And they've been taken aback, like, whoa, I thought what I said was how everyone, oh, really? That's not okay anymore? I'm now reflecting a minority viewpoint, essentially? Yeah, because this is not just breaking down along racial lines. This is largely also a generational conflict. It's not just, white people as a it's old white people as reflecting largely this point of view. And it's not just racial either. There are older black people and younger white people who feel vice versa, but generally speaking. And I've heard those say, voices I respect in the media even, look, all this protesting, you should have seen in the 60s when it was really bad. What are these kids protesting about? Well, I would answer that, in fact, the nature of the protests have changed. You harped on the fact correctly that these are peaceful, respectful protests. These are not 60s style protests. These are protests where the protesters are going out of their way to empathize with the other point of view, where they're going out of their way to be respectful of the opinions and feelings, especially, which is a lot of what this stuff is about. People get their feelings worked up. The feelings of people who want to maintain the status quo, which has been unfair for a long time. So I think that's what's happening in a larger sense across the country. I think these student athletes deserve a lot of respect, and they are praiseworthy, as I believe the university president is praiseworthy for siding with them over the regent who not too long ago would have been voicing dominant culture perspective and would have likely been supported by the university, if not this university president.
Well, those interesting words that you threw out there, dominant cultural perspective. You know, I remember, even though I was born in 1967, we all know the uproar that the Vietnam War caused. We also saw an individual by the name of Muhammad Ali willing to speak out and speak up against, our involvement in that whole ordeal. If I remember correctly, we saw a lot of American citizens, both black and white, literally against the war. A lot of white folks burning the American flag, if I remember correctly, okay? And then we also saw that Muhammad Ali was being victimized, only to later on celebrate and revere him. Unfortunately, it was after the Parkinson's had kicked in and he wasn't able to speak up for himself in a lot of ways. It was almost, there were times, I know that people don't realize this, but there were a lot of black folks I have run across, a lot of people from my community that had a problem with how much Ali was celebrated in the aftermath of his inability to communicate verbally, because it was almost like folks were just putting him out there. And even though they were saying that they were praising him, they wanted him to be seen out there a bit incapacitated to some degree. I'm just telling you.
I think the tide changed before he was incapacitated.
Okay.
The tide started changing in the 70s.
The tide started changing, but I'm talking about the way he was revered and ultimately celebrated. It was thereafter. And a lot of times we find ourselves in this nation being celebrated, honored, respected for things after all the vitriol has long passed, but it doesn't gloss over the vitriol you experienced at the time that you were enduring.
You bring up Ali? I think that's right. You bring up Ali. If you're looking for praise and glory in your lifetime, frequently you ain't going to get it.
Right.
But you bring up Ali. You know why Ali was revered to the extent that he was? And sure, the war became unpopular, and that was part of it, because there was a recognition early on that this man was sacrificing a lot on principle, that the climate wasn't just right for him to take that stand, and yet he took it anyway. And I think the reason that Kaepernick continues to resonate, and this has caught on, is because there's a recognition Kaepernick was a borderline player at the point he took this stance. He really risked being ostracized and being blacklisted, for lack of a better word, by the league when he did this.
Right.
Now it does not require the same kind of courage by these other athletes to follow his lead. He led.
That's fair and that's accurate, but when you bring up Muhammad Ali, trust me, he's somebody that I've revered and idolized all my life, along with a lot of African Americans. But you have to understand, in the eyes of a lot of African Americans, the reverence, the deference, the respect, and beyond for the sacrifices that he was willing to make in our eyes came from other communities afterwards. We always had it for him.
Sure.
We always had it for him.
I mean, like,
but it came from other.
Look what was written about Martin Luther King by some, and now there's a Martin Luther King Day in this country.
So the Hal Dobbs of the world, to get back to Nebraska, is emblematic of a time we were supposed to have graduated from. And we clearly have not fully.
Well, I just want to say this really quickly. There's also, take away any kind of sense that maybe it's coming from a bad place in Dobb, right? There's also, it requires a certain level of mental sophistication to understand what freedom in fact means, and why, in a certain way, you honor the flag when you take the knee because you're protesting issue.
And I think there are those, case, but not now.
Well,
it doesn't take that much mental sophistication now.
I think it does, and I think maybe it's coming from a bad place in some people, or maybe they're simply not sophisticated enough to understand the nuance. I think we have to consider that too.
So in other words, we want to use that as an excuse. So you're not really a bad.
No, but they're ignorant.
It's a description.
What I'm saying is, you're not a bad, evil person or no good. SOB.
You might not just be smart enough.
You just might not be smart.
You might not
really?
be. Yep.
Really? That's where we're going? I mean, because if that's a defense, understand what you've just done. What you have just done is given a vast majority of Americans.
No, he's taking a shot at him.
No, I'm not saying that you're doing it in a way to absolve him of everything. Yeah. I'm simply saying, by saying what you said, us as black folks can't sit back and look at you and go like this. You have iniquities. You have viciousness in your heart. No, you just might.
No, what you can say is this, Stephen A. Let me be very clear.
Really?
What you can say, as black folks, we can sit back and say, well, you could sit back and say, are you bad or just stupid? You could say that. Okay. All right. All right.
We'll leave it there.
I don't know this Mexican, but I don't know you right now.
I get it. He's famous. What have you done with Stephen A. Smith?
Your boys can't come over your house.
I'd like to lick the tears off their faces like Scott Hennerman.
Damn.
People blowing me up on Twitter.
It's the truth. Period.
Me.
And last point is this.
That's a blunt.
Stay off the weed.